Imagine being 15 years old. A small room, the glow of a screen reflecting on a still youthful face. Outside the window, the night is quiet, like any other night. No sirens, no shouting, no sign that the world is about to change. You are just a kid, staying up late, lost in lines of text that mean nothing to adults. Numbers, symbols, rules that are silent but more honest than people. In that moment, you do not know that somewhere far away, inside closed rooms, men in suits are staring at screens. They do not know who you are. They do not care how old you are. They do not see the small bedroom or the fragile dreams inside it. They see only a name. And they begin to ask a question. Can a child become a threat? Right now, while you are still sitting there, your life has already shifted onto a different path. No noise, no warning, just a decision made very far away from you. And you have no idea it has happened. Jonathan James grew up in a very ordinary family. Not wealthy, no great tragedy. Nothing that suggested this house would produce a name that governments would one day notice. His father was a programmer, a quiet man who was more comfortable speaking in logic than emotion. Computers were always present in the home, as familiar as the dinner table or the worn couch in the living room. From a very young age, Jonathan was drawn to the screen, not for games but for control. In that world, everything followed rules. If you did things correctly, the outcome was correct. No one mocked you. No one misunderstood you. No one changed the rules halfway through. Outside, the human world did not work like that. School was loud. Other children spoke in ways Jonathan did not understand, jokes without structure, unwritten rules that were never explained. Jonathan did not hate anyone. He simply felt out of sync, as if he was tuned to a different frequency. He spent a lot of time in his room. Not because he was forced to, but because it was the only place he felt safe. While everyone slept, Jonathan stayed awake, the blue light reflecting in tired but focused eyes. The computer did not ask how he felt. It simply waited for him to keep typing. His family began to worry. Too many late nights, fewer words, a growing distance from what was considered normal. His father tried installing limits, barriers meant to pull his son back into the real world. Jonathan bypassed them naturally, without anger or rebellion. He simply found a way. It was not defiance, it was instinct. When Jonathan touched source code, he felt real. When he read line after line, the world became clearer. In that space, he was not a strange child, not an outsider, just someone trying to understand how things worked. Over time, that difference grew with him. While other children sought approval from friends, Jonathan sought perfection in structure. While adults worried about the future, Jonathan wanted only one more answer. One more line of code. No one in that house realized that this quiet refuge, this silent isolation, was slowly shaping who Jonathan would become. A boy not trying to break the world, just trying to find his place in it. Jonathan was never taught how to become a hacker. There was no mentor, no roadmap. Everything came from curiosity and long nights of self-study. He read books on the C programming language, on how computers truly thought beneath familiar interfaces. He learned Unix, an old but honest operating system where nothing was hidden and mistakes had consequences. One day, Jonathan removed Windows from the family computer. No one asked him to. No one gave permission. He replaced it with Linux. It was not an act of rebellion against his parents, but a natural choice. Linux gave him freedom. It let him see the entire structure, without glossy layers hiding the truth. Jonathan began reading source code the way others read books. Slowly, carefully, line by line. To him, code was not a weapon. It was a story written by humans, full of decisions, mistakes, and forgotten gaps. He did not think he was breaking in. In Jonathan's mind, this was exploration. Testing how systems worked. Seeing what happened when you touched places most people never looked. He did not destroy data. He did not erase traces. He did not seek money or power. He wanted understanding. But on the other side, no one saw a boy learning. Governments do not measure intent. They measure outcomes. Unusual access. Doors opened that should have remained closed. In their world, harmless curiosity does not exist. Only safety and risk. Jonathan saw sloppy code, outdated structures, things that should have been fixed long ago. He even believed he was helping, that finding flaws was a good thing, that someone, somewhere, would appreciate it. The government did not appreciate it. They documented it, logged it, flagged it. On one side was a teenager in a small bedroom believing knowledge was always good. On the other was a massive system where unauthorized access meant danger. Jonathan saw source code. They saw threat. The distance between those views grew quietly, but steadily. And Jonathan did not realize that every line he read, every system he touched, was pulling him closer to an invisible boundary. A boundary where intent no longer mattered, where explanations had no value, where a human being began to look like a problem to be managed. And once that boundary was crossed, no one in power cared that it all started with a boy who only wanted to understand how the world worked. There was a place Jonathan never imagined while sitting in his bedroom. A place with no windows, no day or night. Only metal, cables, and absolute silence. The International Space Station. A fragile structure floating above Earth, where human life depended on systems that could not afford mistakes. Outside the station, temperatures could exceed what the human body could survive. Hot enough to warp metal, cold enough to freeze everything solid. Inside, life existed only because of temperature and humidity control systems. If they failed, there was no escape, no shelter, no survival. That was the system Jonathan had touched. To him, it was just software. A collection of code written by humans, with familiar flaws he had seen elsewhere. He downloaded the source code not to control it, not to sabotage it, just to read. Just to understand. On the other side, everything changed. NASA did not see a teenager learning programming. They saw a vulnerability in something that symbolized human survival in space. A system where control meant unimaginable consequences. In their minds, Jonathan did not need to act. Possibility alone was enough. They imagined the worst. They always did. Someone altering temperatures. A minor deviation. A space station turned into a furnace. Humans trapped not by space, but by their own technology. Jonathan never saw that. The system did. To the government, this was no longer about curiosity or learning. It was about national security, reputation, control. A teenager, even unintentionally, was not allowed to question whether these systems were safe. They did not need proof of malicious intent. They only needed capability. And in a world ruled by power, that was enough to define a threat. At a very specific moment, Jonathan James stopped being a boy at a computer. On paper, in internal reports, he became a name, a risk, an uncontrollable variable. His story left the bedroom, the family, the quiet isolation of adolescence. It entered another space. Colder, quieter, where emotions did not exist and everything was measured by danger. Jonathan did not know that from this moment on, every action in his past would be re-examined. No longer curiosity. No longer exploration. Only one question remained. How do we make sure this never happens again? That morning began like any other. No warning, no sense of danger. Jonathan was still a teenager in a familiar house, where nothing seemed different from the night before. Then there was a knock on the door. Not rushed, not violent, just firm enough to silence the house. When the door opened, Jonathan's world split in two. Outside stood unfamiliar men, calm voices, emotionless eyes. They introduced themselves clearly. The FBI. Jonathan did not run. He did not hide. He did not try to erase anything. In that moment, he still believed something simple. If you have done nothing wrong, telling the truth will be enough. He cooperated fully. Answered every question. Nodded when asked. Handed over computers, devices, everything he had once considered part of himself. Jonathan did not feel like he was losing anything. He thought it was just a misunderstanding. And misunderstandings could be explained. In his mind, the system still operated on reason. He believed the people across from him would see what he saw. A curious boy. A young person learning. No bad intent, no desire to harm. But on the other side of the table, no one listened that way. Each answer made the room heavier. These men were not searching for understanding. They were searching for confirmation. Every word was recorded, not to learn, but to complete a picture already drawn. Jonathan kept telling the truth. That was his greatest mistake. Because the system does not reward honesty, it uses it. What Jonathan saw as transparency, the system saw as evidence. What he believed was cooperation, the system interpreted as capability. For the first time in his life, Jonathan felt himself shrink. No one yelled, no one threatened him, but he was no longer seen as human. He became a file, a case, a problem to be processed. When the door closed behind the FBI, the house felt empty in a different way, not just because the computers were gone, but because something invisible had disappeared too. The belief that doing the right thing meant protection. Jonathan stood there, unsure of what had just happened. He only knew that somehow, everything had slipped beyond his control. Not because he resisted, not because he lied, but because for the first time, he understood a cold truth. When the system decides you are the problem, the truth no longer belongs to you. Jonathan was not placed behind bars. There were no steel doors, no clanking locks. Instead, he was told to stay home. House arrest. A term that sounded gentle, but to Jonathan felt like being trapped inside his own life. The house remained the same. The walls, the bed, everything was unchanged. Except the most important thing was gone. The computers. The devices that had once been his only doorway to meaning. They were taken one by one, leaving a void that could not be filled. At first, Jonathan convinced himself it was temporary, that it would pass. That waiting was all he had to do. But time moves slowly when you have nothing left to hold on to. Day after day, he sat in his room staring at silent walls. No code to fix, no problems to solve, no challenges to overcome. For someone who lived in logic and structure, emptiness became torture. What the system never understood was that they had not only taken Jonathan's tools, they had taken his identity. When you remove the one thing that makes a person feel real, you do not need violence. Collapse happens naturally. Jonathan changed. He spoke less, withdrew. Conversations became short and strained. The focused eyes that once burned with curiosity now looked distant, as if staring through everything. Sleepless nights piled up. Mornings lost their purpose. Depression did not arrive like a storm. It crept in quietly, a weight in the chest, a repeating thought that everything good had already ended. Jonathan was no longer the curious boy he had been, but he no longer knew who he was either. Forbidden from touching a computer, forbidden from doing the one thing he was good at, forbidden from being himself. He existed in limbo, unable to move forward or backward. His family saw the change, but did not know how to reach him. How do you free someone from a prison without walls or keys? How do you comfort someone when you cannot understand what was taken? Jonathan began to feel trapped. Not in the house. In a future that had already been locked away. No exits. No real choices. Just time passing slowly and meaninglessly. This is where people begin to break. Not from punishment, but from abandonment. When the system finishes its task and has no reason to care what happens next. Jonathan was still breathing, still alive. But for the first time, he felt he no longer had a place in the world. While Jonathan remained trapped at home, the outside world kept moving. Investigations continued. New names appeared in reports, and among them was one Jonathan could not ignore. Albert Gonzalez. Albert was nothing like Jonathan. He was not a curious teenager. He was a full-scale hacker, deeply involved in cybercrime, massive breaches, millions of stolen credit cards, hundreds of millions in damage. The kind of criminal the system claimed it existed to stop. Then came the detail that chilled Jonathan. Albert Gonzalez was not only a hacker. He was also an informant, someone feeding information to the very agencies hunting hackers. For years, Albert committed crimes while cooperating, causing damage while helping the system capture others. In Jonathan's mind, the picture warped. How could someone responsible for so much harm negotiate, delay, remain in a gray zone, while he, a teenager who took no money, was flagged so early? Jonathan began to believe this was no longer about right or wrong. It was about image, about the system proving it was in control. And to do that, it needed the right name. Not the most dangerous one, the most convenient one. Jonathan was the teenager who hacked NASA. That story was clean, easy to understand, easy to sell to the public, proof that the threat had been handled. Albert Gonzalez, both criminal and collaborator, was complicated, and systems hate complexity. During long sleepless nights, Jonathan thought about it. He did not need proof. He watched how things unfolded, and he felt that if a scapegoat was required, he was perfect. Young, clear history, no power to protect himself. From Jonathan's perspective, the system was not searching for absolute truth. It was searching for stability, and if stability required one person to absorb society's fear, that was an acceptable price. No one said it out loud. No document confirmed it. But every signal pointed in the same direction. That guilt or innocence no longer mattered. When a system this large is threatened, it does not need the worst villain. It needs a name that fits. And Jonathan James began to believe that name was his. That belief was not born from delusion. It was fed by silence, by closed-door agreements, by the sense that those who caused far greater damage were protected because they were useful. This is where the story loses clarity, where clean lines between victim and perpetrator dissolve, leaving one uncomfortable question. In a game of power and perception, does truth matter? Or does it only matter who is chosen to carry the burden? Weeks later, Jonathan James was found dead in the same house where he grew up. There was no trial, no verdict, no day to stand before the public and say he was innocent. Only a gunshot and a silent room. Jonathan left a letter, short, no excuses, no accusations. He wrote about his family, the people he loved, and the feeling of having completely lost control of his life. He wrote that in a world where every decision was made far away. This was the only way left to reclaim choice. No one stood trial for that. No one was convicted for pushing a teenager to the edge. Legally, no mistakes were recorded. Procedurally, everything was correct. Years later, authorities quietly admitted that Jonathan likely had nothing to do with the major crimes he was suspected of. But by the time that acknowledgement arrived, it meant nothing. There was no one left to hear it. No one left to apologize to. The system kept moving. Files were closed. New names appeared. New threats were identified. Jonathan James' story has no neat ending, no clear lesson, only an uncomfortable silence where we are left to ask what happens when a human being is pulled into a machine too large to stop. If this story made you think, consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. Not for comfort, but to continue looking directly at the stories the system leaves behind.